What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Manji TV. On today's episode, we're going to be bulletproofing this BMW N54 engine. We've got a ton of parts here. Everything's from some pure 800 or high flow plus turbos. We've got forged turbo blankets. We've obviously got a bunch of fluids, hardware for stuff like the oil pan and oil pump, spark plugs, water pump, thermostats, rod bearings, all new lines, just tons of stuff here for this N54 engine. So we're gonna be running you through installing all this stuff. We've got the engine obviously here on an engine stand. We're gonna pull the pan off right now. We're gonna get these rod bearings changed out first thing, get our new pan gasket, pan bolts back in, get all that tight, front main seal, rear main seal, valve cover gasket, spark plugs, all new oil feed and coolant lines for the turbos. We've got solid motor mounts for this thing, just tons of stuff to get this thing all ready to go back in the car. Even little stuff like oil filter housing gaskets we're going to be doing, all new hoses. Morgan's gone ahead, started pulling the bolts off the pan. It's about to be coming off right now. But yeah, we're going to be running through getting all of this stuff on the car. Tons of little things like a front crank guard seal protector and whatnot. So some control arms, we've got some monoballs, some spacers, some relocated inlets for the turbos, just a bunch of stuff. So nonetheless, let's stop talking about it and just get these parts on the motor. So we're gonna go ahead and start with that. Guys, he has actually an upgraded oil pan on here. We already cleaned it previously, but I don't know if you can see that there. There's a welded in baffle plate, this guy here, which really helps. And there's actually like a little door inside of there. I don't know if you guys can see that, but that really helps keep oil around the pickup. As this customer does use his car for track, this really helps with the oil starvation. So another nice mod that this N54 is going to receive. So we have oil pump kind of in the way. You can actually do the #1 rod bearing with the oil pump in place. It is quite tricky. I kind of don't recommend it. We're going to actually just be pulling the oil pump in this case just because it's easier. But first things first, we're going to pull the pickup. We're going to pull this windage tray, and then we're going to go ahead, set our tool up here, which bolts here at the front of the motor and holds the gear here or sprocket for the oil pump. Break this nut loose, and then we'll be able to pull the whole oil pump out of the way. So that's what we're going to do. Let's get to it. All right, guys, so the trick here is, if you really want to do this by spec, I guess they would say to pull this vacuum cover and release the tension off the oil pump drive gear. We're not going to do that, because what you do is you start in the back, you work your way towards the front. You can get 2 done really easily. And when you get to 1, we'll just position the motor perfectly such that we don't have to release the tension. We'll just leave the gear here, which will just hang out on this little kind of pedestal. That's part of the lower timing chain bracket or guide. And what that will allow us to do is not have to turn the motor over, which if we had started with the oil pump and then had to go through the engine, every 2 pistons basically, because you'll have to bring, you know, your companion cylinders up to the top here. We'll show you to a position where it's easy to work on. And if you did that now, basically trying to turn the motor, you'd be fighting this gear against this little pedestal, which is still possible. It will kind of turn on itself, but you kind of will wear down the teeth here on the gears. Not very bad. I've done it this way before in the past and kind of realized that that was not the proper way to do it. So we'll go through 6 to 2. And then when we get to #1, we'll pull the pump. We'll be sure to position the cylinder in the right place before we pull the pump so that we don't have to turn the motor at all. And then we'll be able to bolt the pump back in without ever rotating the motor and kind of putting additional stress here on this gear. So that's the way to do it. Let's go ahead, bar this motor over, and we'll start with 6. And then we'll do 5 and 2, and then probably 3 and 4. All right, guys, we have part number here, 6B1584H. STD, which stands for standard. So these are standard size bearings. It is good to check, you know, measure a journal or a bearing when you pull them out, or if they're stamped standard on the back, then you know. But it is good to double check in case your motor has been rebuilt. With this mileage, this motor's only got like 60K, so we're gonna assume that they're standard. We'll find out here in a bit. We do have some nice ARP hardware, which you can either use the stretch gauge that they supply to do the stretch method, or just the torque, which I believe is 50 foot-pounds. The directions are actually in here behind the fastener assembly lube, which you got to be sure to put here on the base of the bolt, and a hefty amount here on the threads. You really want to make sure that it's coated extremely well. We're going to be using some red line assembly lube for our bearings here, assembling the motor. Morgan's going to go ahead and break the number 5 rod cap. This was just the first one to come up, so we're going to start here, do 2 and 5. So just so that you don't confuse rod caps, I generally like to do it one at a time. You can just pop 2 at a time. They are labeled, sometimes the same. I think they both say F4, so it would be easy to mess it up. And usually there's a number on one side and not the other, which we'll show you here better. I'll get some light, and that has to go a certain direction. So that's something to note. You can't take this cap off and put it the opposite way. If you do that, you will guaranteed spin a bearing, destroy your motor, because these caps are what's called fractured caps. And in all rod, caps in general are all directional. And so if you do put it the opposite way, you will generally spin a bearing. On this particular engine, the way that these rods are made, they actually crack them in half. And so the surface here from side to side mates to the opposite. So what you've done now is push the piston down slightly. You got to go just enough that you can basically push the rod cap over to the side and pop our bearing out. I like to just use one finger, kind of push it out the side, and they generally, I've got you guys on camera, will pop out. These look pretty nice. So there's our first bearing. The bottom cap is generally better condition, but actually seems to be the opposite here. Just due to the power stroke, when the rod comes down, generally the top bearing is actually worn more. In this case, it's actually the lower seems to be slightly more worn. Well, maybe not. Maybe we need to wipe this up better, but generally the upper is more worn than the lower when you pull the bearings out. So what we're going to do is go ahead, put some new bearings in the top here on the rod side, and put some assembly lube on that, and also put some assembly lube on the new bearing on the bottom side. Get these bolts lubricated very well and get it back together and torque it. And then every time that we, do 2 cylinders, we're going to go ahead and rotate the motor to make sure that the motor hasn't locked up. And if you did something wrong, most likely the motor will lock up and not feel smooth anymore, and then you kind of know you got an issue. So hopefully you guys don't find yourself in that situation. Nonetheless, let's go ahead, keep moving forward, and get these rod bearings changed out. And just to specify here, these are 201-6303 part number from ARP for the rod bolts. We're gonna go ahead and just spray this down with a little bit of card cleaner. I like to just kind of clean it up to get rid of the oil residue. Now with the lower or the rod side, you actually really kind of can't do this in the engine, because you're spraying a bunch of card cleaner or potentially getting paper towel material in the engine, wiping everything down, so it's not worth it. You do want to confirm that there's no crazy scoring or anything going on with your rod bearing journals, which there's none. So we're going to continue to move forward. All right, guys, as you can see here, all the tips have been pre-lubed, and so have the base of the heads here. We're going to go ahead and pop this open, and these bearings, be sure when you cut this open, to do it here in the air pocket side, and make sure to not scratch your bearing surfaces or anything. And there is no difference, I don't believe, from the uppers and lowers on these bearings, but we'll go ahead and confirm that here in a second. Some manufacturers do actually provide, like BE specifically, sends you a top and a bottom, which are meant to be used top and bottom, where these BEs actually are not notated, or these ACLs, my bad. All right, guys, so I actually lied to you. They are specific. Actually, the tangs are on different sides. So on one set of bearings, the tang is on the essentially right side, so you guys can see that. So if you guys can see, we call this a tang here, T-A-N-G. It's on the right hand side here. These actually do have a L for, my guess, lower, and the ones with the tang on the left have a U stamped on them for upper, actually. So some engines, they're the same, some engines they're not. Some engines have a oiling hole, which is specific to the side rod or cap that has a hole for it. Every engine is different, so something to notate, but specifically for the N54, N55, S55, you got a tang on the right and a tang on the left. If you look at this rod cap, the little spot here is on the right. If you go to try and put your left-hand side bearing in there, there's nowhere for that tang to live. So it's pretty obvious. Can't really mess it up. So we're gonna go ahead and grab one of the ones that say L and put it in the lower cap. Let's go ahead and do that now. All right, guys, so hopefully you can see this. We have the bearing installed. It is basically flush side to side. So we're gonna go ahead and slap some assembly lube on it, and then we'll go ahead and pull the whole rod up to the crank journal here, and then mate it with our rod cap with some fresh assembly lube on it, and 2 new ARP bolts. And we'll bring those down finger tight. Then we'll torque them to about 10 or 20 foot-pounds. I generally like to back them off at that point, and then I go to the final torque, which is 50 foot-pounds. So let's get it done. All right, guys, Morgan's got the number 6 bearing installed. He's pre-lubing the journal and the bearing. He's got to get some more lube on that. We want to give you a quick look. We've done 2, 3, 4, 5, and now 6. The last one is going to be this number 1. As you can tell, there's still the factory eTorx head bolt, where the ARP is actually a 10mm 12-point bolt and is stamped ARP. So pretty obvious there to designate which is which. So we'll go ahead and tighten our ARP bolts down by hand. ARP doesn't say to do this, but this is what I like to do. I like to torque it to 15 foot-pounds, which is about half spec, bringing it up evenly side to side. And once that's been done, we'll actually break them both free to where they're loose again. We'll bring it down by hand and then do the final torque of 36 foot-pounds. So being careful to go about a quarter turn at a time. We'll go side to side from bolt to bolt. Do a quarter turn. You want to be consistent in the speed that you pull. All right, click them both in again. So now we know they're both at 15. We'll back it up a quarter turn per side. Usually takes about 2 quarters to get them completely loose again. So now, which they are. All right, guys, all the bolts are out. The tool will kind of help keep tension on the sprocket. You do kind of got to pull it towards the tool and just jiggle. The pump is on some actual dowel pins, so you got to be careful. Kind of jiggle it up. Sometimes you actually do have to take this tool off. We may have to here. So we're going to take that tool off, which will allow the sprocket to kind of flex and give us a little bit more. With a little bit of gentle prying, you can actually just leave the gear, and everything here does have a little bit of flex in it, and just gives you enough wiggle room to pull the gear off of the pump. And this dowel here kind of locates the pump there, which is what you're really stuck on. So now we've got all that out, we can just barely rotate this motor back, and we can actually probably do it here if you want to see if you can get on that. So as long as you can get on it, which gets on, we can actually leave it there, which has a nice bit of room here for us to change out our rod bearing, which we'll get this number 1 rod bearing swapped out, get it all torqued, get the pump back in with new hardware. All the hardware here, the pump hardware and everything is all one-time use, so be sure to change it. And we'll get that done, and then get our pan back on and keep moving on to the turbos. All right, guys, we're done with the install of the oil pump and the windage tray here. The torque for these windage tray bolts, they are one-time use. It's 4 Newton meters plus 45 degrees for all of these, including the 3 longer bolts for the actual pickup here. The oil pump bolts are 10 Newton meters plus 90 degrees on the short one and 180 degrees on the long bolt. These as well are also 4 Newton meters plus 45 degrees. The center bolt here is 20 Newton meters plus 45 degrees. So we've gone ahead and torqued all that. We're going to install a new oil pan gasket with our upgraded windage tray oil pan, or baffle plates you could say, which we showed you previously. We are going to use new oil pan bolts, as you should every time you do your oil pan gasket. I'm just giving it a nice final wipe down here before we go ahead and install the new gasket. All right, guys, we got our new genuine BMW oil pan gasket here. We're gonna set that in place, and we're gonna go grab our oil pan, which is ready to go here. Give it one quick look over, like I showed you before. We've got this nice windage tray or baffle plate that's been welded in We've done a very good job cleaning out the oil pan, as this is from the bad motor, so we made sure there was no dirt or debris in here. I'm gonna give it one quick final spray down and then drop it on with our new bolts and torque it to 8 Newton meters all the way around, plus 90 degrees and 180 degrees on the 4 back long ones.
Hey, yeah, let's see how you do under pressure. Oh, yeah, I've been wanting this forever. I've been in the field with whatever they throw at me, brush it off, pick myself up, moving on.
New gasket installed in our valve cover. We're gonna go ahead and drop this bad boy down, just like that, beautifully. We'll go ahead and torque these down to 8 or 10 Newton meters. Now you could use an impact if you guys wanted, but realistically you want to be very gentle with these plastic valve covers as they do warp. So I like to bring everything down by hand and then actually use the torque procedure, which is similar to the oil pan. It's kind of just bouncing around crisscross.
Let's see how you do under pressure. Let's see how you do under pressure.
All right guys, we got the 335 on the lift. We've gone ahead, removed the subframe out of the car again. We're working on swapping over the monoballs to the new control arms we are installing on the car. So we've got these VAC Motorsports monoballs that are already installed in the old arms, which are super high mileage. So we're gonna get those swapped out for some new ones. We also are installing a new oil cooler just to be sure that no metal or debris from the old engine is gonna make it to our new engine. So we've got that here. We've also got some like additional fittings. The kit that we used comes with a straight fitting here, which we've changed for this 90-degree fitting. We're gonna go ahead and get that installed here on the passenger side bracket here and route the lines accordingly. And then Morgan's getting the subframe ready and everything, all the parts organized for the reinstallation of the engine. We've got a bunch of bolts and things to make it all go together smoothly. The engine is over here. We'll give you another shot at that before you install it in the car, but everything is ready, been resealed and ready to go. All right guys, the N54 is on the subframe. Morgan is wrapping up some of the last things like heat shields and just lines and any wiring harnesses that need to go on. We're gonna let him do his thing, get everything nice and torqued, ready to install it in the car. All right guys, final look at the engine before it goes in. We've got everything like the B58 coil packs already pre-installed. Everything's been tightened, transmission mounts, lines, whatnot. The only last thing is we need some new O-rings for these transmission lines, which we'll get once we get into the car, but fuel lines in the right place, breather lines are in the correct spot. Everything's plugged in, everything's ready for reinstallation. So we're gonna go ahead and do just that, stop talking about it and get this bad boy in the car. So let's transition to that. All right guys, now that the motor swap's pretty much done, we'll give you a look at that here in a second, but real quick, we're gonna install some factory monoballs in place of these OEM rubber ones here for this lower thrust arm or traction arm. We also went ahead and installed some new polyurethane sway bar bushings. So those are going to be nice. Some Power Flex units. This thing already has some SPL toe arms and Olin shocks and SPL upper camber arm. But we're going to go ahead, get these traction arm bushings in. This is just a factory Lemforder 306 7901009. Hopefully you guys can see that there. Factory BMW, basically sealed ball joint. It's good upgrade to do to all E9X or E8X cars. Anyways, that is what we're doing. The car is basically all back together. All the panels are in, braces, intercooler, hoses, everything is as it should be. We've got everything routed and zip tied out of the way so nothing will be rubbing. We'll give you a better look at that from above. Suspension's been torqued, the new arms are in and torqued as you saw us do earlier. And everything's looking great, ready for the first start. Got to top it off with some fresh power steering fluid. We've got coolant in it already, some water wetter and some coolant and distilled water. And yeah, we're gonna give her a quick prime for the oil system and get that nice and full and get some oil to the new bearings, and then we'll give her the first actual fire. So let's get that going. If you liked this video, be sure to check out the next one, and if you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to subscribe and like the video. It helps a lot. Thanks, and see you in the next one.